welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Welcome back to the Welcome to My Tent podcast. Hi, everyone. I am here with a solo episode today, and we're going to be talking about moving, like houses, not moving your body, I guess, because I do talk about that a lot in fitness. But I have made a couple big moves in my life, and people have asked me about them. So I want to give my deets on that. I also want to sort of use these solo episodes as a little life update, what's going on in that current time frame. And I will say the update I have for you is there are no updates, and I'm happy about that. So we moved to Phoenix this past October, and because of that, we've had a lot of visitors, and that's been so fun. But of course, when you have visitors, you're doing lunches, dinners, hikes, running around, entertaining. And then we were in Tucson for Easter. So that's a drive, 2 hours. And I've just been a little uprooted for the past, 8 weeks. And I am really excited to have nothing to do except sit here and maybe get to my to be read pile. I've been neglecting my books, but I've been tired. So I get 2 pages in and then pass out usually. Also, Ronan is almost 11 months old, which is insane. So we're planning his birthday party, and a ton of family is going to be coming in for that, which I am amped for. And then that kicks off another season of busy. So I'm hoping to get my reprieve in now before things get wild again. He has been so fun. He is such a little human being. He has a huge personality. He always has, but it's really coming out. He got 6 teeth at the same time, which was not that ideal, but that's pretty classic Ronan. He just goes for it, which is definitely aligned with who he is as a person. So it's been really fun to have him in this phase of life, and he's so interactive, and we're out of that really newborn phase. I wasn't a huge newborn person. I'll probably talk about that eventually on here, but I just wasn't in love with the newborn stage, and I'm okay saying that. So that's what's going on over here. And I mentioned that Phoenix is actually a pretty recent move for us. We moved in October of 2022. So we have not even been here a year yet. I do have a lot of family here, which played into that. But I've actually moved a few times in my life, and they've been decently major moves. Backing up a sec, I grew up in Connecticut and about 50 minutes outside of New York City. So I was in a suburb of Connecticut, but it was really close to the border. And I grew up in New England my entire life. I was there for 18 years. It was all I really knew. And New England's a very specific part of the country, as is anywhere. Someone that grows up in Los Angeles is going to have a very different lifestyle than someone that grows up in New England. And I loved New England, but I was there for 18 years. So when I was thinking about going to college, I didn't even look in the Northeast. I knew I wanted to go somewhere that I hadn't spent time. So I focused my efforts predominantly around South Carolina and North Carolina. I actually had a semi-interesting path to college because I attended Coastal Carolina University for a year before transferring to Elon University. So I was in Myrtle Beach, basically, South Carolina. And maybe some stories from those days will be another episode, which is not today. But I made a pretty big move from Connecticut at 18 years old all the way to South Carolina, where I did not know anybody going to that school. I'm lucky because, my parents were super supportive and helpful and getting me down there and moving me in. But I'm actually shocked that we allow 18-year-olds to just go have free will. It's kind of insane when I think about how immature I was at 18, but in a way that benefited me because I wasn't as scared and I wasn't as knowledgeable, I guess, about life and adulting. It was more of an excitement than anything. And this move didn't necessarily surprise me because I wanted to be somewhere that was not New England. I wanted to forge out on my own and have that new experience. And so I actively pursued that, which I think made it a little bit easier to handle. And with college, you also get in and then you have the months up to prep and plan. I was only in South Carolina for a year and I loved it, but I knew that Coastal was not the school for me. And so I transferred to Elon University in North Carolina, which is basically right between Raleigh-Durham and Greensboro. And that's where I spent the majority of my 4 years. And that move was also planned and exciting. And I was at school with one of my best friends and knew a couple of older kids that were there already. So it was comforting because I was going to people I knew and with people I knew. You know, when you're in college, you just don't care where you live, your lifestyle, at least I didn't. And we were scrappy and fun, and it was a grand old time. When I was there, I knew that North Carolina was not going to be where I wanted to end up. I knew I wanted to go back home. And this is where things get interesting because I always thought I would go work in New York City for a little bit, have my experience there, move back to my hometown and live there, get married and raise my kids there. I don't know why I thought that. I'm glad in a lot of ways I didn't take that path, but for some reason, that's just what I thought. I moved to New York City right after I graduated college, probably a month after I graduated. And I can definitely maybe in a future episode talk about my experiences living in New York City because those are pretty wild. And if any of my friends are listening to this, where we all lived there and we were single and 21, it was a rip-roaring time. But New York was a beast and it's hard to live there. And I'm glad I did it when I was young because I had no money and I had the energy to go out and not be in my apartment because it was a shoebox. I'm just glad that I got it out of the way. That's a bad way to put it. I don't mean got it out of the way because it was a wonderful experience, but I don't think I would have had as good of a time as I did if I was a little bit older. So I'm in New York City thinking I'll be here for a couple years. I'll find my husband here and then I'll move out and I'll go back to Connecticut. Newsflash, I did end up finding my husband in New York City, but this is where things get a little bit wild. A lot of you have probably heard this story, but I'll give a little bit more of a detailed version right now because this is not something I saw coming at all, and it has dictated the entire rest of my path in my existence. So it's this weird butterfly effect thing that is just kind of wild. I lived with one of my very good friends, and it was a Friday morning, and we both looked at each other and said, we're going to rest tonight. We are going to come home and cook a nutritious dinner and go to sleep. And then around, 4 p.m. that day, she texted me and said, do you want to meet at alllll, which is our dive bar near our house? And of course, we had already forgotten of all of these well-laid plans to relax. And I said, yeah, duh, I'll see you there. Little did I know that she was actually with a couple coworkers, and one of her coworkers happened to know my husband, who was in New York City on business. He was on a business trip. He had come from Chicago. He has always lived in Chicago. He met up with her. I met up with them, and I met my husband, my now husband. At the time, I thought it was just this weird stranger. Duke's a pretty odd duck. I just remember thinking, this guy, something about this guy, I'm very attracted to. And I also thought he lived in New York City. He told me at a point in the conversation, I'm actually just traveling here. I'm on business and I live in Chicago. And I dead looked at him in the face and I said, that's dumb. keep in mind, I had never been to Chicago. I had no idea what was even in Chicago, but I was a staunch New Yorker, New York or die, New England or die. And he took it in stride. But what I also find funny is a lot of people think that we had this crazy one night stand story, but we didn't. We met for about 30 minutes max total. And then he left with his friend. I thought, all right, bye. It's good to meet you, I guess, but I'll never see you again. Turns out he friends me on Facebook, which is a weird thing to do. Odd power move, Duke. Friends me on Facebook and is sending me messages over the course of that weekend. I happened to be really busy. I was at my best friend's birthday party and I didn't have time for these Facebook messages. He sends me another one that basically says, it was so nice to meet you. I'm going back to Chicago. That was pretty much it. And I thought, all right, well, guess we're done. To give Duke his credit, which is really funny now because he's not like this. He's not really that assertive, but he was pretty adamant and messaging me. And of course I was messaging back. I was into it. One night we had both gone out. I wake up to a text message from him. We had moved it over to text at this point. Don't panic. And he said, I did something weird. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is where he tells me he's killed 4 people and he has bodies in his closet. What is happening? And then he says, I booked a flight last night to New York and didn't run it by you. I hope you're free next weekend. So here I am. What is this guy doing? This is also kind of exciting, but do I want to get into this long distance thing? He's in Chicago. I'm in New York. I have 0 plans of moving, nor does he. What is happening? But I decided to run with it and said, luckily I'm here and I'm free. And bold move on my behalf. He told me, and this was a true statement, I have a gazillion points from traveling all the time for work. Is one of these 3 hotels by you nice? I'll book a room. And I said, stay with me. We'll know real fast if we're not compatible. Looking back, that was a really assertive move on my part, but he agreed. We'll keep this part short and I will tell you that we ended up dating long distance. And that wasn't as bad as it could have been because he actually traveled quite frequently, either had a ton of points to fly to me or I could fly to him, tons of direct flights to Chicago on a daily basis. So we saw each other real frequently. And for a long distance relationship, I don't have that much advice there because I think the longest we ever went was maybe 3 weeks. And it got to a certain point where we were coming to the fork in the road where we were going to have to figure out what to do. We couldn't do this long distance thing indefinitely, but we weren't really having those conversations yet. And I'm still thinking, I'm never leaving New York. I'm never leaving New England. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. The cosmic part that ended up happening, which is this is the move that really surprised me, was I was working for a company in New York City that also had offices all over the US. And my boss, bless him, Ken, I don't know if you're listening to this, but I probably owe my marriage partially to you, brought me into his office one day and said, I know that there's an opening in our Chicago office. They have sent a note around asking if anyone has interest in moving. This was before remote work. This was still when we were having to be in office. And he said, listen, I will connect you. You'll still have to interview. It's not a shoo-in, but why don't you go in for an interview? When can you get out there? It just so happened that I had planned a trip to Chicago and I was leaving in 2 days. He was able to set me up with the manager out in the Chicago office. And I went in, I did my interview, and things went really well to the point where I was offered the job. I think it was a week or 2 later. But the catch was they needed me there ASAP. I had to call Duke and basically say, we're in an interesting situation here. I was just offered the job in Chicago. He knew I was interviewing. He said, let's take this one step at a time. and we'll deal with the steps as they come. And I said, I got this job. But the thing is, they want me there real quick. I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. And I told him, I will get my own apartment. I'm not asking to move in together. That's too quick, too soon. But what do you think? And we basically had to make the game time decision for me to say yes. And part of what I think helped was that I didn't have a lot of leeway. I think if they had told me, we need you here in 2 months, I would have had so much opportunity to back out. But I almost just had to say, this lined up. The universe has given me something and given me this road, and it feels like I should take this. So within a 2-week span, and it also happened to line up with my lease ending, everything just fell into place. And these are the moments where I feel like I really have to trust my gut and trust where the universe is telling me to go. But I really didn't have a lot of time to do this. So within that 2 weeks, I had to virtually find an apartment, contact movers, and bless my dad. He agreed to drive a U-Haul with all of my stuff in it to Chicago from New York City. It was really wild to me that I had changed my mind so fast, I guess. But I talked to my mom, and I will never forget what she told me, because she said, I mentioned to her my fears. I said, what if I hate it? What if we break up? What if it's not for me? What do I do? And she said, you do not get chained to the city of Chicago when you move there. If something happens, you're young, you're footloose and fancy free, you leave. Move home. Move to Singapore. Move. And for some reason, that really helped me, because I felt like the pressure of trying to make everything succeed there wasn't as high, if that makes sense. And I ended up moving in to this cute little apartment in Lincoln Park. 6 months after that, Duke and I agreed to move in together, and then we got engaged and married and blah, 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 blah. But here we are, and I finally thought, okay, maybe this is home base now. A lot of Duke's family is in Chicago. My family had all migrated out of the East Coast at that point, so it wouldn't have even really made sense for me to go back to the East. I said, maybe this is home base. I'm good here. You know, we can find our neighborhoods that we like. Eventually, maybe we'll consider the suburbs. COVID definitely threw an interesting curveball into this, because all of us went remote. And I think what was also keeping us there was our jobs. And we were in office, and that's where we were headquartered or stationed. And things were not just as flexible at that time. And my family was living out here. My brother was in Phoenix. My mom was in Tucson. And we were visiting all the time. We love it here. But at that juncture, it was still just a place that we visited. I never really thought, maybe this would be a potential for us to live one day. So once we all went remote because the world basically shut down, we realized that's not tying us here anymore. We started to maybe think about moving. And we thought, all right, well, I don't want to move to a suburb of Chicago just to pay all these crazy taxes and expense to never go to the city, because it's always high hopes that when you move to the suburb, I'll go to the city every chance I get. You don't do that. And we started thinking about Arizona. We took a trip out to Arizona. We drove out there in the initial phases of the pandemic and spent 6 weeks and really started to say, okay, this is pretty awesome. Let's think about it. What derailed us in a way was the fact that we had a lot of trouble getting pregnant. So I had the intention, LOL, which did not go in any way, shape, or form according to plan, that we would just get pregnant like normal people. And we did not. And I didn't want to leave my doctors or my clinic, and I didn't want to leave my OB. So there was a few years in there that were a little ambiguous. And I think that's why this move for us wasn't shocking like the New York to Chicago move was, but a little bit more, is this going to happen? Are we going to do this? Are we not? We were bound by a lease in Chicago, so that was also adding a year to our docket. Our IVF timeline did not match up with that. So I think we ended up in Chicago for a little longer than we would have if pregnancy had gone according to plan. We finally found the gap in our schedule that would work. But what was really crazy about this time frame was we either had to deliver my son in June and move 3 months later, or deliver my son in June and move a year and 3 months later. So we had to make this quick game time decision almost of, when are we going to do this? We need to pull the plug either way. We either need to tell our landlord we're staying, or we need to schedule a move. And we both decided, let's go for it. I think it would maybe be easier to move with a 3-month-old who's immobile than a year and 3-month-old who's probably running around. We don't want to have him get adjusted to a schedule here and then move him. But we're also a little bit crazy for doing this with a newborn and tackling moving across the entire country. But we had to pick our hard. And that's something that I've realized within all of these moves is you need to pick your hard. And for us, there were plenty of challenging moments within all of these moves, but we had to weigh the list of pros and cons of which path do we want to choose? Which hard do we want to choose? We also had to think about that in terms of climate. Chicago has brutal winters. They are terrible. If you've lived through them, you know. But Phoenix has awful summers. So what's the trade-off here? We had to think about that a lot before we went through with it, and pro-con lists were crucial. We also had to think about the fact that, yes, we were going to be closer to my family, but we were going to be further away from Duke's, making sure his family was on board. And ultimately, they know it's our decision, but we love them and we have to take that into consideration. Ultimately, what we realized is that we have to do what's also best for our family and where we feel like we're going to thrive. And for us, Phoenix felt like that. Chicago started to get a little scary, I won't lie. By the end of our time living there, crime was a little iffy and it was just so expensive. Daycare costs there were asinine. So financially, it made sense to move. Space-wise, it made sense to move. Ronan was sleeping in a closet in our house in Chicago and we wanted space for him. And we felt ready in a way to make that move to settle down into a more suburban space, I guess. Phoenix is a city, but it's a little bit more suburban feel than the city of Chicago. And sometimes that lines up to where you are like this move. Sometimes we're ready for that phase. And sometimes it doesn't, like my move from New York to Chicago. And it's a little bit challenging to navigate that. But I also kept in mind what my mom said to me when I moved to Chicago. You don't get chained here. You're not legally going to be arrested if you leave the state of Arizona. And she, of course, hoped we loved it and want to stay. But she also knows you got to do what's best for you and your family. What I've also realized is there's very few things that you can't figure out, even if they feel so stressful and high stakes in the moment. All of those things can typically be figured out, even if it doesn't look like how you thought it was going to pan out. Moving is really stressful. There's so many things that go into it between packing and moving, and especially cross country, getting the truck. And we had to figure out how to even get there because we had a car. So Duke had to drive the car with the dog. I had to fly with the baby because I wasn't going to make him drive for 3 days. Our stuff was in transit. So we luckily had a place to land at my mom's. Within that, we even kept saying, okay, well, if things aren't working out at my mom's for some reason, not that it wouldn't, we can go to an Airbnb. We can go to a hotel. Even if these things feel like they would be earth-shattering, if you take a step back and you think about it, you can find a path forward. So that kind of kept us grounded, especially with the ambiguous nature of the truck could be there between 7 and 11 days. We had no idea when that would be. It was a little chaotic, but grounding yourself in, we can figure this out and we got this, and taking it one step at a time. Honestly, get the packing done, get the moving truck done, get yourself there. We really had to take it one day at a time and give ourselves a lot of grace in that process. those are my major moves. And I've had a lot of big ones. And I will say something that's come out of it is I have found such an appreciation for what I've learned in the different areas that I've lived. And it's not to say that if you live in one place your whole life, that's not amazing. There are so many benefits to that. I think community probably being the biggest one, where you have some of these people in your life and in close proximity. And if you are blessed enough to have them for your whole life, that's amazing. But for me, I actually felt like I've grown in a lot of ways by living in these different places. College is going to be a huge growth period in general, but experiencing the South and the way of life down there and figuring it out on my own for the first time, living in New York City, which is just such a jungle and so crazy. And when I tell you I had no money, I really mean that, to the point where I would stalk corporate meetings that were always over catered. And when they were done, I would have clean Tupperware at my desk and I would go take sandwiches and bring them home and eat them for dinner. I was scrappy. You figure it out. Living in Chicago was such a different way of operating, the Midwest lifestyle, and the neighborhoods there were just so different and the pace was so different than New York. And of course, that was the pivotal time in my life where I was getting engaged and married and attempting to start a family, which we all know didn't go exactly according to plan. But even that process helped me grow. And now living in Phoenix, I am experiencing the desert. I'm experiencing the Southwest and the food and the culture and the people. And I've been able to find different people in my life along the way. And that's something that's been a huge plus for me. I would have never met half these people if I didn't go to school where I did, or I didn't live in New York at the time I did. One of my very best friends in life, I met at work because I lived in New York City. And if you're contemplating making a really big change in your life, almost remember that butterfly effect, but not in a scary way, almost in the coolest way ever. Just like if I had never gone to that bar, I would have never met Duke and never moved to Chicago and never had my son and probably never been in Phoenix. So think of it as a way to open yourself to what is meant for you. And I truly believe that. I think I'm not necessarily a super religious person by any means, but I consider myself spiritual. And I kind of operate in this sense that I think that there is a book written for us that we don't know about yet. And if you listen to the messages and the signs and what your gut is telling you, it will open you to so many new things that will, of course, be challenging in some way, shape, or form, but will also bring you such positivity and joy and people. And that's been one of my most cherished things about moving to a lot of different places. Now, it's not to say that this is a forever home for us. I hope that we set up roots here and we'll take it one day at a time. I also have to keep myself open and continue to listen to where I feel like the world is taking me. And of course, if Duke gets some crazy, amazing opportunity in London or Paris, whatever, we'd go. And I think the fact that we've made these moves makes those decisions less scary. When you get out of your comfort zone and you push yourself into a new situation, that's giving you the muscle memory to be able to repeat those actions in the future. I think it's made me a braver person. I think it's made me a better person. And I also acknowledge just the vast privilege that I have to be able to do this, to keep my job or my company as I am moving, to have the funds to be able to move my family. That's not lost on me. That is a little bit of my journey. I feel like I have given you a lot of info and maybe just some intel on how I've done these things. A couple of people have asked almost, how do you find the bravery to make these changes? And I will say the more you do it, not even just moving, the more you make challenging decisions with confidence, the easier it gets for you to do it. So whether that's changing jobs, whether that is moving across the country, whether that is writing a book or starting a podcast, any decision, find what feels best and aligned to you and go with it. And know that you're not chained to the city of Chicago if that doesn't go according to plan. If you're thinking about making a big life change, just remember you got this. And remember that you're stronger than you think. It will open you to things that you probably could have imagined, both good and bad, but they will change you and they will shape your experience as a human being. All right, friends, that's about it. I'm going to go hang out with my kid. We'll talk next time. Love ya. Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My 10 podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.